Favorite shows? No worries. You can now listen to each podcast with Alexa. It's simple and it's free. Just visit afr.net/apps and click Alexa. We're not joking. Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview.
The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is April 2nd, but we are still in the day, it seems like, that we've been in for a while of the Fools. That was April Fools yesterday, and it seems like there are a lot of foolish things going on in Washington. And one of those things, this headline coming from the Post-Millennial, Mike Johnson is committed to bringing Ukraine aid to the floor. Republicans say it could lead to his ousting. It is very likely that after this Ukraine bill, we may have a standoff with the speaker. And of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene has already brought a motion to vacate. And according to Conservative Brief, Speaker Johnson says that he and MTG have been in frequent contact over the motion to vacate. But my question is, what is he doing? I mean, the ouster with Kevin McCarthy was a good thing for Republicans when we then have Speaker Johnson, but it seems like some of these priorities are very McCarthyian in nature. So joining me now to discuss what is going on Capitol Hill is our good friend Representative Bob Good, who is the chair of the Freedom Caucus and stalwart conservative, and we always appreciate when you drop by. So what is going on, Representative Good? And I know Mike Johnson is a very committed conservative, so a lot of these priorities and some of these moves just seem really inconsistent.
Good morning, Jenna. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me again. The problem is that we once again, a week ago Friday, or 10, 11 days ago now, we passed a major spending bill overwhelmingly supported by Democrats. It was the third or fourth consecutive one of these with the continuing resolutions, and then the two minibuses where he took the omnibus and split into two parts. One voted on March 8, one voted on March 22. So instead of passing 12 different appropriations bills, which were due last September 30, that's why we don't have the previous speaker anymore, but those were extended, last year's funding was extended after September 30 through a series of continuing resolutions or CRs, which kept in place the spending levels and the policies from when Pelosi and Schumer together controlled all of government with Biden. Finally, we finished funding fiscal year 24, which again was September 30 last year deadline, funding fiscal 24 by splitting those two, the omnibus into two minibuses. At least we didn't do an omnibus. That would be the claim anyway. We split into two. However, once again, it was overwhelmingly supported by Democrats. Democrats, Jenna, did not even claim floor time in opposition to it. So what happens before you vote on a bill like that? You have debate time on the floor, designate half of it going to the majority in support of the bill, in theory, and half going to the minority in opposition to the bill. Once again, Democrats did not even take their time in opposition. So Freedom Caucus conservatives, led by my colleagues Chip Roy, Scott Perry, Matt Gaetz, Thomas Massey, and so forth, spoke against the bills on the House floor in opposition to our Republican majority that was passing them. However, they weren't even Republican majority bills. The first omnibus passed with 99% of Democrats on March 8. The second one passed with 90% of Democrats on March 22, most recently, because it increased spending by some $60-70 billion over when Democrats had full control, and it largely kept their policies in place. So why wouldn't they vote for it? A little bit of hope there that the first one, 2/3 of Republicans supported it on March 8. The most recent one, after work from folks like yourself, Conservative Nation, conservative voices across the country, Freedom Caucus members and so forth, we were able to keep it to a minority of the majority, which means we broke the rule that we have in place, the Republican conference rule, that we're not supposed to bring legislation to the floor that's not supported by a majority of Republicans. 101 Republicans voted for it. 112 voted against it. So that was some progress. I suspect that was because of primary season. Some of them are concerned about having a primary challenge from the right, from a conservative, from a Freedom Caucus fighter in their respective districts. Also, Jenna, some, like Mike Rogers from Alabama and Austin Scott from Georgia, they switched their votes against the bill because it didn't have a pay increase for Congress. That's something they were willing to fight for, a pay increase for Congress. So they were going to vote for the bill. They didn't have a problem with the bill that increased spending and kept the Pelosi-Schumer policies in place, but they didn't want to vote for the bill if it didn't contain a pay increase for Congress. So that's where we are. We failed to fight. We failed to secure the border. We failed to use the leverage of the power of the purse to say, no, we're not going to continue to fund the policies that we campaign against. We're not going to increase spending. What we should have done was pass a Republican bill out of the House that reflected Republican priorities, Republican spending cuts, border security, and then had a fight with the Senate when the Senate said no, which would have resulted in a temporary partial government shutdown and to see who the American people were behind and to see who had the resolve to fight for their position. And then you would meet somewhere in the middle. That's what should have happened. That's not what happened.
And you laid that out so brilliantly. And in it, I think as conservatives listening, it is frustrating to see that the Republicans in the House aren't using the majority to your advantage to meet somewhere in the middle, because I would have been fine personally, just as a conservative, with that temporary government shutdown if all that Mike Johnson and the majority of Congress and the Freedom Caucus were doing was simply stopping the reckless spending and simply stopping the far leftist policies and positions, because even if there wasn't a lot of advancement of conservative priorities because of the composition of the Senate and obviously with the Democrat in the White House, if all you're doing is disrupting the Democrats' agenda, that's still a win. But it seems like Speaker Johnson, I mean, is he just in over his head? Did he not realize some of the pressures of the speakership, or what is it that makes the Freedom Caucus able to stand firm, but the conference in general, he doesn't seem to be able to manage to keep with these priorities?
Well, you are exactly right. What should have happened is, again, the speaker should lead the Republican conference, say, this is the direction we're going. I need you to follow me. Let's go into battle together. The American people are behind us. We've got to deliver on what we've said. We've got to show a difference between us and the Democrats. We're not going to continue to fund this government's border invasion after what happened in Texas, with hundreds rushed border personnel 2 weeks ago now and mob rushed their way into the country and overwhelmed physically, violently border personnel, setting the new standard, I guess. If you want to get in the country, there's any obstruction, I'll just overrun it. Hey, we're not going to fund that. This is not a third world country. This is not a banana republic. This doesn't happen yet. We should have refused to fund that border invasion. And if not only that alone, and then like you said, you're not going to get everything that you want in divided government when you have one half of one branch. However, what we are essentially doing is figuring out what the Senate will take, what the president will sign, and we're passing that out of the House. So we have this seamless transition with no disruptions or discomfort or temporary pauses or risks of a government shutdown, so that we show that we can govern and we can work together and we can get along. And then we just move towards now, September 30, the fiscal year 25 deadline is there. So what would make you or someone, a conservative across the country, a Republican voter, think that we're going to do anything different over the next 6 months, between now and September 30, to fund the government for fiscal year 25, which again is due by September 30? Because if the Senate says no, then you're butting up into an election, into a potential government shutdown again. That means we're going to cave and surrender once again and just do what the Senate wants to do and promise voters that we'll start to fight for them in January 25 if we have the House, if we have the Senate, and if we have the White House. But then, Jenna, the excuse will be we don't have 60 votes in the Senate. So at some point, you've got to be willing to say no. You've got to be willing to take some risks. You've got to be willing to fight. That's not what we've demonstrated a willingness to do.
And I'm speaking with Representative Bob Good, who is the chair of the Freedom Caucus, and it seems like there's never a great time for Republicans to stand firm. There always are these excuses. It's primary season, it's election season now, it's, we don't have the majority. I mean, all of these different excuses, yet Democrats seem to get their way all the time, regardless of excuses. And that's just frustrating. But you had mentioned a little bit earlier the primary season and some conservatives that are actually more to the right than incumbents coming up for election with the primary. Were there any significant wins, or are there still upcoming primaries that we should be aware of in particular?
Well, I'm looking at Jared Sessler, who's challenging Dan Newhouse in Washington State. I'm looking at Brandon Herrera, who's challenging Tony Gonzalez in Texas. I'm supporting Adam Morgan, and I'm supporting Jared Sessler in Washington. I'm supporting Adam Morgan, who's running against William Timmons in South Carolina. And I'm supporting Derek Evans, who's challenging Carol Miller in West Virginia. These are states or races where we've got more courageous conservatives that I think will be part of the solution, who will be willing to do what's right, do what they tell their constituents they will do what they tell the voters they will do, fight for the right things in Washington, not be co-opted by the D.C. swamp and be absorbed into the system, if you will, and toe the party line and just be do what they're told to do. I think these will be individuals who will fight. And so we're looking at other races like that throughout the country where we've got Freedom Caucus conservatives challenging incumbents, challenging the type of individuals who voted for these bad bills. Because, as my friend Matt Gaetz likes to say, we're not going to change Washington with some of the people we've got up there. We've got to get new people up there that actually want to change Washington and want to make Washington work for the people across the country, not just make Washington work for the people who are in D.C.
Not just be voting for pay increases as their top priority.
Indeed.
So I hope that everyone who's listening, who is from the states that Representative Good mentioned, will look into those races, see if you were in those districts. Know that primaries matter, of course, because then when you get to the general, if it's just a mediocre Republican versus a Democrat, you're not really getting a win. I mean, of course, I would say the mediocre Republican is better than the Democrat just because majorities matter. But we want to put up the best candidates all the time. But in just the last about 2 minutes I have with you, Representative Bob Good, and again, always so appreciate you joining. We are praying for you as an AFR family, for the Freedom Caucus, and for everyone in Washington. And thank you for the great work that you are doing. I wanted to ask you about Biden's very weird remark yesterday when he was confronted by a reporter about proclaiming Easter Sunday was Transgender Visibility Day, and he said he didn't do that. The White House is now trying to kind of minimize it, and Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, said it's misinformation. You posted about this and said this is what they think of Christians in the most holy of days that we celebrate. What's your response to that particular very odd comment from Biden?
Indeed, and you wonder if, Jenna, is he just a chronic liar, and he just lies, he thinks without consequence, and it's just instinctive that he just lies and deceives. We know he's never been an honest guy. He's always been a liar. Is it more that he's lying, or is it literally the staff didn't even tell him, and he doesn't even know, or he doesn't remember, or he got befuddled, or he's confused? Either way, we do know whether he was lying or whether he literally can't remember or doesn't know, or it's just an incompetence or awareness issue. We do know where his heart is, where his default is, and it is for the radical leftist, anti-God, anti-family, anti-morality mentality that permeates the Democrat Party today, permeates his administration. They look, I'm just reading this morning about his administration adding X onto as a gender option onto the immigration paperwork, that when you fill out immigration paperwork to come in the country, you can choose male or female or X. That's what they think is important. That's who they are. That's the lens through they look at every policy. And so it's not surprising that he would do it. And whether or not he's lying about it or whether or not he's forgotten about it, I don't know. But most importantly, this is what he thinks of the most sacred day on the Christian calendar, which is the dominant, obviously, faith in this country. And it's consistent with how we were founded on Judeo-Christian principles. But it shows who this administration is and this president is.
It does, and it's really concerning as well if he didn't even know and some of his staff just put it out for him. I mean, who's really running the White House? I think that's a valid question as well. But Congressman Bob Good, thanks so much for your time, and we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Spring Share-a-thon is coming April 9th through the 11th, and it's dedicated to the memory of Brother Don Wildmon.
For all of the Wildmon family and everybody there at AFA, we want you to know we're standing behind you with our prayers, asking the Lord to be with you, comfort you, protect you, and give you strength as you continue to move forward. We thank the Lord for all that you're doing, and we're just thankful to know that Don is with the Lord, and now we just pray that will comfort your hearts to know that he's in heaven, and we just pray you will continue the good work that you're doing here on this earth. As we continue tonight together, we are supporting you financially and in our prayers as well. Lord bless you all. This is Phil Tappert.
I'm calling from Alger, Ohio, Kathy Johnson. Earth was richer, but now, with the passing of Brother Don, heaven is far richer.
Thank you for your thoughts, prayers, and support of American Family Radio.
This is the Lost in Translation Ministry Minute. Here now is your host, Dr. Baruch Korman.
We can be assured that God is going to move forward in his path, his purposes, his will. It's going to come about. He will come on us like rain, and rain biblically is synonymous with a blessing, and the latter and former rains to the earth. It's interesting, but the latter and former rains are those rains that soften up the soil, and those things that also at the end, the crops need that last bit of moisture in order to thrive and produce their abundance at the end, the greatest yield. And God's promising here that he'll provide everything so there'll be a blessing.
Learn more about the teaching ministry of Dr. Baruch Korman at loveisrael.org. You'll find videos on almost any biblical topic on his YouTube page and on the My Bible Study app. That's loveisrael.org.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Abraham, I know our hearts and prayers are with those affected by the Israeli conflict in the Middle East. Here's a great need right now in that part of the world. Nora is a born-again believer. She's a widowed mother of 4. Her husband was killed by a terrorist cell, and one day radicals showed up and burned her house down, nearly killing Nora and her 4 daughters, the youngest of which 4 years of age, maimed for life with very serious burns. Now, her crime is, number 1, she's a born-again believer. Number 2, she was found to be educating her daughters beyond the age of 8. In that system, that is a serious violation. But I can tell you, rather than grow bitter, Nora has introduced about 50 Arabic-speaking women to Christ. They need Bibles in the Middle East. In fact, by the end of April, will you help us bless 4,000 Bibleless believers around the world? Abraham?
$5 sends a Bible. $100 sends 20. $500 sends 100. You can give by calling 800-YES-WORD. 800-YES-WORD. Or visit sendbiblesnow.org. That's sendbiblesnow.org.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, on Easter Sunday, this headline coming from Breitbart, preeminent atheist Richard Dawkins said on Easter Sunday that he identifies as a quote-unquote cultural Christian and that he prefers to live in a country based on Christian principles and would not want the UK to become an Islamic nation. He said, I think it would matter certainly if we substituted any other religion. That would be truly dreadful. So listen to this, and as you're listening to this, just the cognitive dissonance between what he calls cultural Christianity and how good for society Christian principles are, and the founding of a country as a Christian nation, and yet rejecting the truth of the gospel for himself as an atheist. This is fascinating. So listen to what he had to say to LBC Radio.
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer. But there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it wouldn't matter if we certainly if we substituted any alternative religion, that would be truly dreadful.
Well, which brings me to my supplementary point, which is that, as we know, church attendance is plummeting, but the erection of mosques across Europe, I think 6,000 are under construction, and there are many more, are being planned. So do you regard that as a problem? Do you think that matters?
Yes, I do, really. I mean, I have to choose my words carefully. I mean, if I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time. I mean, it seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion, in a way that I think Islam is not.
I think you're going to have to explain why you say that, Professor Dawkins. Why is Islam fundamentally not decent like Christianity?
Yes, I mean, the way women are treated. I mean, Christianity is not great about that. It's had its problems with female vicars and female bishops and things. But there's an active hostility to women, which is promoted, I think, by the holy books of Islam. I'm not talking about individual Muslims, who, of course, are quite different. But the doctrines of Islam, the Hadith and the Quran, is fundamentally hostile to women, hostile to gays, and I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
Really fascinating. So joining me now is Walker Wildmon, the vice president here at AFA, and so much to unpack, Walker. What's your initial reaction to this conversation?
Yeah, I was rather shocked, and that was like the second or third time I've heard that clip, but I'm still hearing new things as I'm listening to it. But the admission that Richard Dawkins likes Christianity, or at least likes the benefits of Christianity, and he doesn't want to profess Jesus Christ as Lord, which is what's required for salvation. So he's admitting, he's saying, I'm not a believer. I don't believe in Jesus Christ as my Savior, but I sure do like the benefits of this whole Christianity thing. And then his shot at there was also shocking, because that's not very politically correct, especially in Europe. And you heard the interviewer say, you're going to have to explain that. So you Christianity all day long, but you take a shot at Islam, and you're going to have to explain that, which I thought was fascinating. But he made some valid points. People can profess the truth. They can acknowledge the truth without fundamentally believing in Jesus Christ as the Son of God and as their personal Savior. And that's what Richard Dawkins just did there. He professed the obvious, that cultures that adopt Christianity as their primary main framework, moral framework, often benefit and are better for everyone, even for the unbelievers. And that's what Richard Dawkins confessed there.
Right. And what's so fascinating about this is the cultural Christian, which you and I think would use that same phrase to say people who embrace what Christianity and its values and worldviews and mores in civil society provide for them, without then giving our all and laying down our will and our lives, picking up our cross and following Jesus, and so not going the step further to say, because of what Christ has done, therefore I am accepting the full truth of Christianity. It's only just about what Christianity in culture does for me. So there's a very different view, but he's acknowledging that Christianity is far more internally consistent, is better, even on as an atheist, his scale of good versus evil, right versus wrong, it's better. And it's also provides better, quote unquote, equality. I mean, and even, I'm certainly not a feminist, but understanding that the Christian worldview is the only one that treats all persons, regardless of sex, race, demographic, age, any of our immutable characteristics, all as human beings with inherent dignity, because we're all made in the image of God. And so he's acknowledging some of these fundamental premises as good for society and contrasting that with Islam. So he's admitting basically the internal consistency of the Christian worldview.
Yeah, America has shifted, in the last several decades, probably the last 50 to 70 years, really, is we've shifted being a largely between being open to Christianity or being friendly to Christians, and then being a born again believer. So we're not trying to morph these two together and act like they're the same, but there is a difference in practicality. There is a difference, and in our nation in the past, we've had a large cultural Christianity population, and these are people who they may not profess Jesus as Lord, they may not live completely consistent lives according to Scripture, but they're at a minimum not hostile to Christianity. They don't want to wipe it off, the face of the earth. They don't want to, reconstruct the Constitution and take out religion. That's where we've been in the past, but we've entered a new era in America where that's not good enough for the unbelievers. They want to tear it down. And Richard Dawkins, like I said earlier, unbelievers at times can unknowingly say very wise things, whether they know it or not. And what he's saying about Christianity and the cultural effects of Christianity is so very true. If you want a society where human rights are protected, where justice is sought, where freedom and liberty is pursued, all within the confines of biblical morality, then Christianity is the way to go. And that's what's made America what we are today, is Christianity and the adoption of Christian principles. So this is just a hard truth that a lot of people are beginning to recognize, that, look, hey, if I'm going to have to pick a society to live in, I'm going to hang out with the Christians because they're not running around like the Muslims, cutting people's heads off, beating their wives and all this dark stuff that is in the Muslim religion. I'm going to hang out with the Christians over here in the West. So this is a hard reality that a lot of people are adopting. And I think the Muslim migration from the Middle East to Europe is really causing a lot of people to wake up. Europe is in a mess with this Muslim immigration. A lot of radicals, a lot of Sharia law sympathizers in Europe, and Dawkins is in that area, and he sees the problem with that.
Yeah, the other Breitbart headline was England no longer a Christian nation as atheism and Islam makes gains. And so this just according to the census, not talking about their civil society or their legal structure, but just the majority of people in both England and Wales are not Christian for the first time probably since the 7th century AD. Data from the 2021 census published on Tuesday reveals, and that would have been back referring to November of 2022. So that has likely only increased. But to your point, Walker, this is why it's so important for Christians to understand that we can't just live out our truth, for example, or preach the gospel in the confines of our churches. We have to spread the truth of the gospel and act Christianly and demand a foundation of civil society that is based on Christian virtue, because anything else, including a secular state, which is also a religion. I mean, atheism is a religion. If you excise God or you replace Christianity and the truth with any other worldview, not God or some other God, then you end up with a lot of the problems that we are experiencing in the West today. And that's exactly what the Marxist revolution has been all about. What we're experiencing now in terms of the rise of feminism, some of these issues that we're seeing with the life issues and with the contraception case that just went up to the Supreme Court started during the sexual revolution, that wanted to divorce the idea and decouple the idea of the confines of marriage and the traditional family, and just say that, this is just for pleasure, or it's not for procreation, or it doesn't matter, or we can use abortion as a contraceptive. I mean, all of these different ideas that are not founded in the truth of the gospel of Christ, and that's just one issue, then ends up blossoming into all of these other things that now we're celebrating the Trans Day of Visibility on Easter Sunday. We're, into all of these just morally and practically and reality absurd ideas because we are losing our grounding in the West on a Christian worldview. And so it matters what our response as Christians are and what it is to the culture, that we don't just hide our light under a rock. Don't hide, like the old song that I used to love to sing with my family. Don't hide it under a bushel. No, I'm going to let my light shine into the culture and demand that we continue to go back to our Judeo-Christian roots and that our society continues as a Christian nation.
Yeah, that's right. The myth that religion and Christianity doesn't belong in politics, doesn't belong in religion. In government. We've got to be this secular government, not driven by any type of set moral code. Is the greatest myth and has caused the greatest tragedy on America. And I know you speak about this often. You actually wrote an entire book on this. But our Constitution is set up. Our founders said for a moral people. For a people that adhere to Scripture, that acknowledge God as creator and sustainer. And so until we get back to a place where God is part of government, where biblical morality is part of how we structure our laws, then we're going to be in a bad place because somebody's ideas are going to win. And this is the problem with Christians shying away from government or pushing their beliefs on government or in our laws, is that somebody's ideals are going to win. And do we want the atheist ideals to win, or do we want our ideals to win? We're going to have to follow some type of rule set, right? In order to have a sane and somewhat civil society, there has to be rules. There has to be boundaries. There has to be do's and don'ts. And whose rules are we going to follow? Are we going to follow rules set forth by God that are known to promote human flourishing, or are we going to promote ideals that lead to destruction and societal breakdown? And Richard Dawkins is proclaiming the obvious here, and that if he had to choose, he would live in a Christian nation and a Christian culture so that his rights are protected as well.
And my guest this morning, Walker Wildmon, who's the vice president here at AFA and host of At the Core. And Walker, the question I would have loved to ask Richard Dawkins is, how consistent are you in saying that you want to actually live in a Christian nation? Does that mean then that you are pro-life? Does that mean then that you actually want to live in a society that adheres to the moral virtue as taught by Scripture? I mean, how far does that go? Because he's saying, I'm willing to take all of the benefits that it gives me. And he points out, of course, some of the hypocrisy of Christians, because, of course, not every Christian lives this out. I mean, we've all seen examples of, men not treating women with the dignity that we deserve. We see some false views of Christianity, like saying that women can become pastors or so forth. And so we're not talking about those specific human examples of failing. We're talking about the worldview itself and the truth of the Bible. And I would love to ask him, how far do you go then? Do you just want some of the benefits that you see, or are you willing to take that as far as the implications of the biblical worldview actually go? Because if we are willing to do that in society, we would have such a better nation in terms of our civil government and the way that everything functions if we would simply live according to truth, which is exactly what the Bible teaches, not just in our personal lives, but also in the truth of society, which is our definition of politics. So the music's coming, but last 30 seconds, your response to that.
Yeah, this is why a little bit of wisdom came from Dawkins, but also a little bit of lingering questions as far as the depth of his knowledge there, of his insight into cultural Christianity and the benefits thereof. The reality is that many people are benefiting from Christianity and Western civilization and Judeo-Christian values, and the more things become dark in this world, the more people are going to realize that the Christian way, the biblical way, is the true way to human flourishing.
Amen. And so it's incumbent upon us, Christian, to know the biblical worldview, to live consistently with truth, and to turn away from sin, follow God, take up our cross, follow Him, and be engaged in civil society. We'll be right back with more.
The Bachelor of Arts in Christian Ministry at Wesley Biblical Seminary is the perfect opportunity to prepare for God's calling on your life. It's easy to make excuses why you can't pursue what God has called you to do, but this program removes those barriers: flexible class options, an affordable cost, and highly trusted professors. WBS is the school for you, and now is the time to take a next step and prepare for God's calling on your life. Learn more at wbs.edu. That's wbs.edu.
Is your success in life being stolen? Here's Pastor Jeff Shreve.
Unbelief is involved in every single sin. Why did Eve eat the forbidden fruit? Because she believed the devil's lie rather than God's truth. Hey, if you don't believe God, you'll never be a success.
Learn what real success can be like. Join Pastor Jeff Shreve on From His Heart each weeknight at 6 Central here on American Family Radio.
Forever, O Lord, your word is firmly fixed in the heavens. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. The American Republic was founded on the principle that rights are given to us by God, not men. As a result, men nor government can take them away. That's why our Declaration of Independence refers to our rights as inalienable rights. Government's role, then, is to protect the rights that God has given to us. The first freedom listed in the Bill of Rights, which government is entrusted to protect, is religious liberty. The founders did this because they knew that free exercise of religion is the fulcrum for all liberty. Wherever the flame of religious liberty is extinguished, all liberty is imperiled.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
The words you are about to hear are taken from letters sent in by members of the Trinity Debt Management Program.
Dear Trinity, today I'm making my final credit card payment.
Before I came to you, I was in a constant state of anxiety and panic, but now there is hope for my family's financial future.
Working with Trinity made me understand that I'm not alone.
You really do help people.
Your kindness will never be forgotten.
Without Trinity's support, I would not have achieved my lifelong goal of becoming debt-free.
We saved a lot on interest and penalties, of course, but the reward was the gift of human kindness.
Trinity has carried me through a very difficult time in my life. You're amazing.
I used to feel so anxious and hopeless. Now I feel grace and peace.
God bless Trinity as you continue to help others become debt-free.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And yesterday, because we were talking about so many other things and, of course, coming off of Easter Sunday, we had Tho Bishop, who is a great friend of the show and with the Mises Institute, and we did not have an opportunity to get to the Sam Bankman-Fried story. And so I invited him back to talk about this today because his insight into this and why the story matters actually in a larger picture, I think is fascinating. And this is why I love having people in other fields and other conservatives that have all of these views on this show, because I learn so much, and hopefully then you as listeners as well learn from the guests that I have, just because what I think is fascinating. Hopefully you do too. So let's welcome back in Tho Bishop, and the story is, of course, Sam Bankman-Fried, who is the FTX billionaire that, of course, some people are calling him Sam Bankman-Fraud, as Devin, my great producer, said in the break. He has been sentenced to 25 years in prison after being found guilty of several felonies. And this, of course, was after massive fraud on hundreds of thousands of customers that unraveled during the collapse of FTX, once one of the world's most popular platforms for exchanging digital currency. So, Tho, your thoughts on this, because a lot of people just focused on the 25 years, and I saw a lot of people, including my friend Charles Payne, who was tweeting that's not enough and everything. People kind of focused on that more rather than the bigger story.
Yes, the former billionaire, Sam Bankman-Fried, at this point. But no, I think it's a very fascinating story because in many ways, the least interesting aspect of it is the actual crime, right? I mean, unless you're one of the customers affected, in which case, that is very much your top interest there. I think the story itself, it reflects, I think, various different aspects on some of the underlying corruption that a lot of the modern economy is founded upon. One is the extent to which Sam Bankman-Fried was able to almost kind of launder his the problems with his business, this fraud dynamic of his business, through political donations, through kind of charitable kind of washing of his incentives away to kind of build up trust, trying to utilize the political capital that he earned through these contributions, through playing up, these various left-wing causes, trying to use that political capital to implement a regulatory structure for crypto, ironically, that would have better served his business. That's kind of how you have cartels sort of develop, is through the help of powerful people in powerful positions. But then there's the other element of this is the extent to which ultimately the kind of underlying behavior here, right, in which you take customer funds and you use it on the investment side of things, which is ultimately what Sam Bankman-Fried was found guilty of, right? They took customer funds deposited with FTX and started funneling them into Alameda Strategies, the investment part of that business. There's a lot of similarities with the way the modern financial sector works, the way the modern banking system works with a fractional reserve banking system, where you go to the bank account, you deposit your money, the bank is able to lend out a large percentage of the money that you have deposited. There are very clear contractual differences there. The terms of service for FTX was not supposed to allow this, whereas if you actually read the fine print of your agreement with the bank, that is there. But ultimately, that dynamic, this is why we have bank runs. This is why there's always a layer of instability that exists within the modern banking system. And ultimately, what sparked the downfall of FTX ultimately was people kind of catching on, people sharing on social media, people reporting, leading to depositors requesting their money. That same dynamic is kind of what brought down Evergrande Bank, and as a constant threat that various very important, very powerful people in the financial world, they're kind of looking at trying to limit what can be said on social media, because once you have that break of confidence of people catching on to this idea that firms may not have all the money that you want whenever you want it, again, there's some parallels here between what Sam Bankman-Fried did with FTX and the way that a lot of the traditional financial sector operates. And I think Americans need to recognize that these are part of the risks that regulators allow for the traditional banking sector that ultimately brought down what FTX was doing with the way that they were treating customer funds.
And so this is why this is all fascinating. So is the difference between what happened with FTX versus the traditional bank lending, how the laws allow for this, the difference here and why there was fraud is because of just the misrepresentations that FTX and Bankman-Fried made to their customers versus maybe just the disclosures in the fine print of traditional lending institutions?
Yes. So ultimately, this is why Sam Bankman-Fried is going to be punished while the executives of Evergrande Bank are not, right? In the case of Evergrande Bank, you had the FDIC come in, you had banks come in, right? You had kind of, a bailout dynamic with that, the people that lost their jobs, so they're not going to jail. Whereas with this sort of parallel infrastructure within the crypto industry, they don't have those sort of protections. And good, I'm not a big fan of those things. And that is why Bankman-Fried is getting the criminal aspect to it. But again, like the instability aspect, though, is something that is true for both. And again, just how modern finance operates right now.
Yeah, which is just wild. So, so what should we learn as conservatives through this story and kind of the bigger picture of how banks work currently and what maybe needs to change in the regulatory regime?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is appreciating the extent to which the modern financial system, I think, really is the problem with a lot of the larger economic issues we have, because this dynamic of being able to create new credit, which is what banks do, which is similar to the creation of money, which is what the Federal Reserve does. It creates a dynamic in which it helps fuel corporate consolidation. It helps fuel economic inequality. And what I mean by that is that the people that are the biggest benefactors of being able to utilize this new credit, they tend to be more powerful individuals in the economy. They tend to be favored industries, right? So this is why Silicon Valley thrives. This is why manufacturing, the Rust Belt has declined, is that this entire dynamic of being able to create credit kind of out of thin air has helped drive this financialization, has helped drive, I think, a lot of the concerns, a lot of the criticisms with the erosion of kind of the real economy, and has helped profited the financial economy. And cryptocurrencies, I think, can be an aspect of that. I think it's also relevant to understand what separates FTX from other things like Bitcoin, for example, because there was an attempt to kind of paint the entire crypto industry with the broad brush of this fraud, whereas the real issue with FTX was kind of these tokens that they were creating, the FTT tokens. They're kind of unique to that exchange. So that kind of shows the ways that the exchange created financial products within that are different than kind of independent products, which is what Bitcoin is. There's no institution involved with it. There's no politicalization for it. And that's why I think you've seen Bitcoin now reach heights that even in the aftermath of this scandal, which actually brought Bitcoin to one of its lowest points in recent years. Again, and also again, just recognizing that one of the big ways that these powerful institutions, the way that the left and powerful economic institutions lock step in step, is the way that corporations are very effective at poking the whatever the in vogue charity cases that they pay that tribute to left-wing causes in order to get benefits from the political class. And I think Elizabeth Warren was utilizing Sam Bankman-Fried's verbiage for regulation in order to further their control over these industries. And the last bit is the importance of capitalization. Capitalization over regulation, I think, is a blueprint that conservatives, particularly on the law, our members of Congress should be looking at when it comes to the safety and soundness of the financial system. Because if you don't have to worry about the capitalization side of things, then the judgment of regulators is a lot less important. What we have right now is a system where we're hoping that regulators will catch bad activity or insecurities within banks and institutions like that. And that's, regulators are always one step behind kind of the innovations in the financial world. If you have high capital requirements, if you can actually enforce those things, I think that is far more important than the regulatory side of things. And we're actually seeing battle going on right now with traditional banks over what are called Basel requirements. And unfortunately, you have sort of Chamber of Commerce Republicans lockstep with kind of moderate Democrats actually trying to water down some attempts to focus more on the regulatory side rather than the capitalization side. And I think that has will have longer-lasting consequences in terms of maintaining some of the instability within the banking system.
I'm speaking with Tho Bishop, who's with the Mises Institute. You can follow him on X, formerly known as Twitter. And with the whole regulatory structure, of course, the Uniparty in D.C. would love to regulate even more in general. I mean, there's a few conservatives that like that limited power balance. But what does this story with Bankman-Fried and FTX in particular, how does that affect cryptocurrency and this big push from the feds to try to regulate Bitcoin and some of these other crypto investment options?
Well, you definitely, the Biden administration has basically been waging war on the cryptocurrency industry for several years now in a variety of ways, making it difficult for actual good faith banks. There's a woman, Caitlin Long, who has Custodia Bank up in Wyoming, who was calling he was talking about how Sam Bankman-Fried's general strategies were basically were fraudulent years before it ever came on the radar, right? And yet her bank, which is conservative, which is responsible, has faced an uphill battle getting approval from DC. And then the Biden administration is also trying to use energy uses and things like that. A big reason why, and the good thing though, is that in spite of these headwinds, again, we see Bitcoin's price go up. We see after all of these attacks, there is still demand and interest in these products, and a big reason for that is because of the inflationary dynamic. It's because of kind of losing faith in traditional finance, and I think all of those are good reflections of people picking up on some of the concerns that I have, right, about the state of the dollar, about the policies of the Fed, of this dynamic. And so I think the fact that cryptocurrency has been able to survive, and even now, currently thrive after the big shadow that Sam Bankman-Fried came in, is an important thing, or is a good sign for this. The attacks are going to still come, but I think that, particularly given new administration, we've already seen indications that the Trump administration is willing to take a more positive view on cryptocurrency than it did the first time around. So those are positive things. And so I think that this is the more that cryptocurrency is challenged by bad actors and scandals like this, you don't want to be a part of that. So you always kind of want to make sure that if you're in Bitcoin, you want to try to keep as much control over your assets as possible. Having your own wallet, things like that. But I think the resiliency there is very fascinating in terms of this product that is very much grounded in being separate from politics, separate from that regulatory state. The fact that it continues to bounce back out of consumer demand, I think is a very positive thing for where people are recognizing, again, some of the real problems we have in the modern financialized economy.
Yeah, all really fascinating, and I feel like, in a sense, that the big boom that was, pre-COVID, for sure, you don't hear as much about crypto just in the mainstream, and maybe that's just because the headlines are purposefully trying to diminish that demand and influence, but it is all really fascinating. So Tho Bishop, really appreciate your time, and thanks for coming back on 2 days in a row, and so we could finish talking about this story. Always appreciate your insights and having you. Thanks so much. And in just the last minute that we have here, I wanted to answer a question from Rich, who wrote in during the segment and asked, with respect to us talking about the cultural influence of Islam in the West in the last segment with Walker Wildmon. And if you're just tuning in and you missed that, go listen at afr.net. But he asks, how far behind Europe is the United States with respect to the challenge and the dangers of Islam? And according to the last census, Islam is the third largest religion in the United States, behind Christianity and Judaism. And of course, that doesn't account for atheism, which a lot of these censuses, I think, wrongly or incorrectly don't designate as a religion. It's a worldview. But so far, we still have more self-identifying Christians than Muslims, which is very different from the UK and Wales as of the last 2022 census. But this is why we need to always consistently promote the truth of the gospel of Christ, fulfill the Great Commission, and engage in our culture and bring that truth to our civil society, to our community, and have our laws reflect the truth of the reality that the biblical worldview is the only consistent one, and we can do our part to preserve a Christian nation. And my book is called The Legal Basis for a Moral Constitution. You can always reach me, Jenna, at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
As a federal or state employee, you have the opportunity to support the American Family Association.